Representative Grahavla has already said, hey, I'm signing when I get to Congress, so that gives us the 218. I do find it interesting, though. You have Congressman Massey talking to Axios and saying, don't let it be a Democrat who's the 218th signature. Let it be a Republican. That would be good for us to signal we want transparency. I appreciate Congressman Massey's sentiment there. But my second point is 218. Getting to 218 is 218. And if it's a Democrat that gets you there, you got your number. What does that piece look like now going forward when the Congress convenes after a short break in the beginning of October?
And great news, first of all, for the country, for Democrats, for transparency. Look, Adelita Grijalva, besides being that key 218th vote, is a fighter. And I think we should all be excited that we've got another, I think, aggressive fighter in the Congress that's going to push really hard against Donald Trump every day. And what's exciting, of course, is she is going to be that key deciding signature to get actually that petition, those votes onto the floor, out the door, so we can get the entire Congress behind the release of the files. And what's important for folks to know is we know we already have a subpoena in place through the Oversight Committee, of which we forced a vote on to get those documents to the committee. The DOJ has stalled that. What this does, though, is this gives the power of the entire Congress behind the release of the files. And from what I'm hearing, unless Mike Johnson pulls out another Trump maneuver and being directed by Trump to do something differently, I am hearing there are other Republicans that actually want to actually vote on this issue. And they want to be on the record supporting transparency. So we invite every Republican that believes in good government and really justice for these survivors and these victims to sign on, to vote. Let's get all of the files in front of the Congress and out to the American public. Great win for Democrats, by the way. And I'll add, she overperformed. Every race, Democrats are overperforming. That's probably a good sign for us as we go into next year.
Let's talk then about the timing of this discharge petition. Can we pull up the House calendar? You got a work week. You have a week where the House is in session. You have a district work week. How soon do you think Grijalva is signed into office? And then how soon do you think you can potentially have that discharge petition on the floor?
Well, we're waiting for Republicans to actually call the House back into session. I mean, we were going to have session this upcoming Monday and Tuesday, and they actually abruptly canceled that right before a possible shutdown. Look, Donald Trump wants a shutdown. He wants to be king. He has no interest anymore in governance or working with Congress. And the American public should be very clear-eyed that Donald Trump and Republicans are actually now going to own the shutdown. They want to halt this government. They could care less about providing services. They want to hurt veterans. And so Democrats have to be prepared to be in D.C. and ensure that we're pushing back every single time Trump opens his mouth over some craziness that he's talking about as it relates to funding the government. He has no idea what he's talking about and the damage he's going to cause across the country. And so it is possible that Mike Johnson calls the Congress back maybe October 1st, maybe before. We have no indication when that's going to happen. But right when he does that, we're going to have Adelita there on that day, getting sworn in and getting that petition signed. So it could be midweek this week. I hope it's sooner.
And in just hours, the man behind Jeffrey Epstein's so-called sweetheart deal is set to testify before the House Oversight Committee. Former Labor Secretary Alex Acosta will take questions behind closed doors as part of the House panel's investigation into the deceased sex offender. Back in 2008, Acosta served as the U.S. Attorney in Florida and approved a secret non-prosecution agreement that shielded Epstein from any federal charges. As part of that deal, Epstein pleaded guilty to state charges involving just one underage victim. He served 13 months in jail with work release privileges. Let's bring in MSNBC legal correspondent and former litigator Lisa Rubin. What else happened beyond that? Epstein serving 13 months with Alex Acosta's career, and what questions are you hoping to hear answered in the hearing today?
Well, Mika, as we all know, Alex Acosta was Trump's original choice in his first term to be labor secretary. He didn't survive for very long because of revived questions about his tenure as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. It was in November of 2018 that Julie K. Brown at the Miami Herald first published a 3-part series about that sweetheart deal and about the questions that victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein still had, including the fact that they had been walled off from this non-prosecution agreement. Right. But in terms of questions that members of House Oversight might have for Alex Acosta, look, these were events that happened 18 years ago. Alex Acosta gave a transcribed interview to the Department of Justice 5+ years ago when they were investigating him and 4 other members of his office to see whether they committed professional misconduct or ethical violations in bringing to bear this sweetheart deal. Theoretically, his memory today is going to be worse than it was 5 years ago. So one of the things I would want to know if I were a member of the House Oversight Committee is what Alex Acosta says today and how it compares to what he said 5 years ago. And there's no evidence yet that the members of the House Oversight Committee have the transcript of that interview even in their possession. If that's the case, then today's interview might be of much utility as Ghislaine Maxwell's interview with Todd Blanche. That's not to compare Alex Acosta to Ghislaine Maxwell. I want to be really clear that the Office of Professional Responsibility at the Department of Justice concluded Alex Acosta did not commit professional misconduct, that he was within his rights, exercising his authority as the U.S. Attorney to come to this agreement. But what they did say is that he exercised terrible judgment. And I want to zoom out, if I can, for a second. When Alex Acosta became the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, he was 36 years old. He had had a number of really impressive positions in the Department of Justice and in government, but one thing he had never been is a line prosecutor. He had never been involved in criminal prosecutions. He had served, for example, in the Civil Rights Division of Justice. He had completed a clerkship at a federal appeals court. He had worked at Kirkland & Ellis for 18 months, but he had never before worked in a U.S. Attorney's office, and he was ill-equipped to be the person overseeing this. I would submit to you that we are living through a time right now where the consequences of having people at U.S. Attorney's offices who are more distinguishable for their loyalty than for their experience in criminal prosecutors' offices, we are seeing those consequences come to fruition every day. And that will be instructive, I think, in this interview.
Lisa, that's such a great point, and it's such a great warning for us today when you look at all the inexperienced people that are being placed all over government, based not on competence, based not on knowledge, based not on skills, but based solely on loyalty. I will say in this case, though, even an inexperienced young attorney had to know that he was doing something wrong. I'm not saying he did know, but it would be shocking for Alex Acosta, even a 36-year-old prosecutor, to not know that you don't make deals with a sex offender without notifying those young girls who he abused sexually, who he was making this plea deal for. Also, that there would be a deal that would get rid of state charges, despite the fact he was on the federal side, and would allow Epstein to walk in and out of his business day in and day out. And one other thing that I think we're still actually paying for today, if we want to get to the bottom of this, giving Epstein the room to destroy any video evidence, any audio evidence, any pictures, any evidence, all of his crimes. And that's exactly what he did. So I don't understand how even a young, inexperienced prosecutor could have made all of these mistakes.
Well, and I would submit to you, Joe, that there's one other fundamental mistake, which is seeing these crimes as crimes of prostitution as opposed to trafficking. You know, we heard from a number of the survivors at a press conference on the Hill about a couple of weeks ago, and one of them was a woman named Haley Robson, who said her life had been destroyed because in the past she had been described as a co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein, a person principally responsible for the recruitment of others. And Haley Robson really challenged us to think about her differently, that she was someone who herself had been trafficked, manipulated and controlled by Jeffrey Epstein, and induced and coerced to bring to him sort of a never-ending supply of other young girls. Alex Acosta bought into a narrative where someone like Haley Robson was seen as a teenage prostitute, a willing participant, and really what was her own victimization, as opposed to seeing this for what it was, a sex trafficking ring in which, as Haley's attorney has described it, Jeffrey Epstein was principally his own pimp and John at the same time. And so that framing of these issues, and I hope we've come a long way since 2007 and 2008, really led to the construct of that non-prosecution agreement that allowed Jeffrey Epstein not only to evade responsibility and participate in a work release program and destroy evidence, as you said, but also led to this narrowing of the investigation itself and a blaming of the victims. One of the reasons Alex Acosta told the Department of Justice that he sought this non-prosecution agreement was because he thought that the victims themselves had credibility issues. Why did he think that? Because he was seeing them as prostitutes and not as victims.
Okay, let's talk about your early days here in Congress. You have been appointed to a very powerful committee, the Oversight Committee. Your mentor, Jerry Connolly, was once the ranking member of that committee. You've been investigating the handling of the Epstein case. That's been a big focus of the committee right now. The former Labor Secretary, Alex Acosta, testified before the committee on Friday. First, tell me your response to what you heard from that interview, and what more should we expect from your committee?
What I heard in that interview, and I participated in more than an hour of the interview with Mr. Acosta, is consistent with what we've seen from Trump and his allies in Congress and Mr. Acosta throughout this Epstein saga. Callous disregard, in my view, for the victims, the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Mr. Acosta showed no remorse for the sweetheart deal that he signed off on for Jeffrey Epstein that allowed Epstein to continue raping and abusing women and girls. And it was deeply, deeply troubling to me. I also find it very hard to believe that after he signed off on that deal, years later, Donald Trump made him his labor secretary. And Trump knew about that deal when he made him his labor secretary. Of all the Republicans on the planet, Donald Trump could have named labor secretary. He picked the guy who gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal. Why?
Yeah, but the Republicans are critical of the way the minority members like yourself have handled this investigation, because they feel like you've focused too much on Donald Trump and not enough on the victims and seeking justice. How would you respond to that criticism?
Well, look, I think there's a lot to learn about Donald Trump's relationship with Epstein and his role here. And there's a very easy solution. And I've said this, Chairman Comer, go down to the floor and sign the discharge petition to release the files. And if Trump isn't implicated, if he's barely mentioned, no problem, we can all move on. Why is Trump preventing Republicans, preventing his administration from releasing the full files?
And it looks like you're close to having that discharge petition at least make it to the floor. You've signed it already. It was one of your first acts as a member of Congress. Democrats feel like their chances are good in a special election tonight in Arizona. Is there the possibility, though, that there really isn't any more information in these files, that even if they were to be all released, that you maybe wouldn't get the answers that you're looking for? What else needs to be done?
Well, here's what we know. There are survivors out there who still haven't had the opportunity to fully tell their story. We've heard that from some of them, so that opportunity needs to be afforded to them. I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions. And again, I come back to why is Trump not allowing his administration to release files? If what you're saying is true, and perhaps it is, why not release the files?
Yeah.
He hasn't.
Yeah, these Epstein files need to be released. I'm an Epstein victim that nobody knows about. I don't have all the proof and documentation the more recent victims have. I go all the way back to the 1970s, late 70s. It was me that brought everyone together, unfortunately. And I was a little girl. And back then in the 70s, it's very unfortunate. It's very sad. But children who were used in this manner, like I was my whole life, they were labeled the P word. And what a horrible thing to do to a child. In my case, I met Jeffrey Epstein in the late 70s when I was about 12. Trump was brought to my house at different times. They were never together. It was probably before they knew each other, but it was my people who probably brought them together, my situation that brought them together. And at the very end, just before high school, I started high school in 1980. I was born in 1965. And in 1980, I was 14, turning 15. 15 at the end of the year. I was about to be a freshman in high school. And it was just before then that I believe Jeffrey Epstein was no longer brought to my house. Basically, he got to a point where he was pissed that he had to keep coming to my house. And he really thought it was more proper for me to come to his house. And I really think that his shift in attitude had a lot to do with this woman he brought towards the end. It seemed like she had everything to do with it, and that was Ghislaine Maxwell, who I didn't even hear speak. I did hear a British accent at one point, but she remained silent for most of the time, and all she did was watch. And I did not care for her. I did not like her. I liked Jeffrey. I know it's hard to explain that one. The only way they could get me to cooperate was by giving me sex drugs against my will, and I was a minor, but I didn't want to take them. And my father, Dennis Wayne Elliott, used to call it my aspirin. That's how he trained me since I was a baby to take this sex drug. I really thought it was an aspirin, and I'd tell him, I'm not sick. Why do I need to take an aspirin? Take the aspirin or I'll kill you. I'll shove it down your throat. And I didn't want to take it, but I had no choice. And then it would affect my behavior before everyone would show up to my house. But everybody didn't know that a sex drug, aka an aspirin, was shoved down my throat before their arrival to my house. And this was the confusion because a lot of boys that I grew up with were brought to my house by their fathers. It was all a network. It's all CIA stuff. And it was very confusing for them to see me act one way at school and a whole other way when they were brought to my house. And at first they thought it was just like a game or something. And then they would sadly realize that they must have realized I was on some kind of drug, because at school I was not that way. And I made it clear I was not that way. And I don't know what they thought, but there was a lot of confusion. So I didn't choose this. I'm not saying these girls did either. The well-known Jeffrey Epstein victims, they were just as violated. But just so you understand, the reason he had so much money was because I had so much money that I still to this day don't have any access to. I'm almost 60 years old and I still don't have access to my own assets that I was born into because I was labeled top secret in 1975. And it's been over 50 years that I've suffered under the fake label top secret. It's real, but it was a crime to label me that way because the way they did it was to label me a threat to national security. A 9-year-old girl home alone in 1975 in Old Greenwich, Connecticut. The good guys, the FBI, needed to protect me somehow without telling my parents, because my parents were not informed of how much I had or anything. So this was the only way they could protect me without telling my parents everything. But both my parents are dead. My father, Dennis Wayne Elliott, died in 2020. I found out a couple years after the fact because nobody cared to inform me, his firstborn child. And my mother, nobody cared to inform me of her death either. She died in 2022. And it's been a while, and we're coming upon my mother's third death anniversary, and I still don't have my money. I don't want anybody else's money but mine. Anyway, the Epstein Files will be released because I am going to be declassified, whether Trump likes it or anyone else in government in the Republican Party likes it or not. All of them are being paid off with my money. I have many genetic fathers, and this is the detail about me that is very difficult to understand. I was not conceived naturally. I was conceived in the laboratory, and I was born the firstborn of triplets, and I have an identical twin sister who has changed her identity permanently. So really, my birthday belongs to only me on October 21st, my big 60th birthday. That was a concern in the past that we couldn't declassify me on my 60th birthday because it was also my identical twin's birthday. But she has, and I'm glad about this, she has changed her identity and her birthday and everything permanently. It's my birthday now. My triplet brother never celebrated that birthday. They rearranged the numbers so he would celebrate a different birthday. And this is good. I was the only healthy, normal baby. My triplet brother is my ex-husband. Yeah. And the release of the Epstein Files will be the release of me. And I'm really looking forward to that day when I can have a life and turn 18 for the first time in my 60 years of life. I've never been a full-fledged adult because I've never been allowed to have full access or any kind of access to what is solely mine and only mine. All my assets, everything. And I co-wrote a lot of films and TV shows and music. I was a child prodigy, and music was and is my greatest talent, and I haven't started writing it again. And that is next. Anyway, the Epstein Files are about to be released, and I guess we're waiting on the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, to bring everyone back into session, which can happen next week. Monday and Tuesday, they are in session. He's trying to avoid a vote on this, but the Democrats have their 218 votes that will make this happen. And Mike Johnson can't avoid the vote very much longer. Yeah, I just want to state that everyone, every child, anyone who is under the age of 18 is an innocent victim if anyone is inappropriate with them. Any adult is inappropriate with them. I remember the older sister of someone who was my good friend in middle school. She called me that P word because that's what another family thought I was. And it's not possible for a child to be a P because they're being violated. They can't consent because they're a minor. And I know there's the age of consent in different states. And yeah, the age of consent in New Jersey was 16, as I remember growing up. I remember in California when I moved there, the age of consent is not until 18. And I was so used to the law in New Jersey, I really wasn't used to that. If somebody's going out with somebody and then they turn 18, they can't continue going out with them and being intimate with them until the other person turns 18. And that's a pretty severe law. At the same time, yeah, 16-year-olds, they're pretty young to be consenting. Honestly, when I was growing up, that was normal for me. Yeah, it was pretty severe in the 1970s. And there were movies. I remember Pretty Baby. Brooke Shields is one of my genetic daughters. Yes, I know, strange. She's older than me, and that's possible in the laboratory. And she starred in Pretty Baby. That's one of the films that I might have even worked on it. I haven't seen it for so long. I don't know if I worked on that one. I co-wrote a lot of scripts, co-produced a lot, did everything when I was a child. I haven't been allowed to do anything as an adult, and it's very sad for me. My whole life was when I was a child, and I've just been dead ever since, it seems. And I really am looking forward to turning 18 on October 21st, 2025, my 60th birthday.